It's been over 30 years since we were first introduced to cinema's most infamous killer doll, Chucky. Who could have predicted he would also now be television's most infamous killer doll? After 7 movies, a successful first season on television, it's clear Chucky isn't even close to retirement. And while his latest adventures are surprisingly fun and even thought-provoking, we're going back to when it all began. The 1988 classic Child's Play, and its first sequel, 1990's Child's Play 2. Some of you might scoff and assume that the sequel has no chance against the one that started it all in this face-off, but you might be surprised by how much of a punch the second one packs. And the way the franchise has progressed lately, it's not at all that odd to imagine 2 Chuckies fighting one another. So strap on your good guy overalls and send the babysitter out the window, because we're putting Child's Play against Child's Play 2. And let's start with the little bastard himself. As you're well aware, Chucky's deal is that he's actually notorious serial killer Charles Lee Ray, trapped in the body of a seemingly harmless good guy doll.
I gotta find somebody.
Chucky's only way of getting out of the plastic prison is to tell his secret to someone, then transfer his soul into that body. In the first film, Chucky is seen fleetingly until the second half, when he's revealed to be an understandably bitter creep with a surprisingly robust sense of humor given the circumstances and all. He may be a doll, but he still gets a laugh out of killing someone. Gotta appreciate that. Chucky is a mean mother whose rage at his circumstances more than compensates for his diminutive size. In the sequel, Chucky receives a lot more screen time, and his determination to take over Andy Barclay's body is alive and well. As this is usually the case in the sequel, the producers took a look at what worked well in the original and amped it up, so Chucky's snarky humor is even more pronounced, with the devilish doll unleashing a slew of eye-rolling wisecracks and put-downs.
I hate kids.
At this point, it's been a very long time since Chucky's been genuinely creepy in this series, but both films work successfully to make him loathsome and enjoyable at the same time. Verdict: draw. In recent years, Chucky's look has been defined by his disfigured face and ratty hair, but the guy had a mostly clean-cut image when he first started out, and to that end, the first 2 movies are pretty much a draw. But as is only natural, the special effects that bring Chucky to life evolved over the years. In the first film, Chucky's movements are fairly limited, as are his facial expressions, although none of us noticed that when he was scarring the crap out of us as kids. The sequel ups the ante by a considerable margin, giving Chucky a full range of movements that aid him as he stalks, kills, and screams bloody murder. The effects in Child's Play 2 by Kevin Yeager Productions are a huge leap forward for the still young series, helping to establish Chucky as a sarcastic bundle of nightmare fuel for the ages. Verdict: Child's Play 2. And you can't talk about a famous horror villain without bringing up their body count. Sometimes it's how the great ones are measured. While it's clear Charles Lee Ray offed a great many people in his pre-good guy days, we're just talking about the notches on Chucky the doll's belt here. In Child's Play, Chucky acquits himself pretty well for a guy still adjusting to life as a plastic doll. He whacks 4 people here using a toy hammer and a window to ice poor Maggie, a house explosion to kill old partner Eddie. And neither kill is super impressive, right, honestly, but then Chucky goes full voodoo when he cracks up old mentor John and gets really sadistic with an electroshock execution of a kindly old doctor, a quintessential Chucky kill. Chucky, of course, tries to take out a few more poor souls, but he's thwarted by a surprisingly resilient mother and son team. In the sequel, Chucky is allowed to murder nearly double the amount of people, starting with a supernatural electrocution, moving on to a suffocation, death by ruler, breaking a neck, slashing a throat, stabbing a chest, and most creatively, managing to off a guy via doll eye machine. While he's arguably scarier in the first film, you have to give it up to Chucky in part 2. The runt manages a pretty impressive body count. Verdict: Child's Play 2. For a guy who killed a startling amount of people in his day, old Charles Lee Ray is, unfortunately for him, no real match for a little boy named Andy. Somehow, someway, the kid keeps on managing to slip through the serial killer's fingers. And no offense to Andy, but while a sympathetic figure, he doesn't exactly light the screen on fire, so it's more about the people he's paired with than him on his own. In the first film, Andy is teamed up with single mother Karen, who's determined to fight off Chucky no matter how enraged he gets. Joining them in the third act is Detective Mike Norris, a no-nonsense cop who is responsible for this whole mess in the first place, having been the one to shoot and mortally wound Charles Lee Ray. While Andy is more or less the main character, it's his mom and Mike who really draw our attention, as both characters are believable, likable, and very well performed by Catherine Hicks and Chris Sarandon. Poor mom is sent off to the loony bin between parts 1 and 2, and Detective Mike is nowhere to be found, so Andy is paired up in the sequel with Kyle, a fellow foster kid, and Kyle is initially presented as a bit of a drag, but as the film goes on, she becomes a worthy heroine, not about to take any of Chucky's shit, and even being instrumental in his ultimate mangling and destruction. It's hard not to root for Kyle and Andy as a team, but the effectiveness of the performances from Hicks and Sarandon give the heroes in part 1 a leg up in this contest. Verdict? Child's play. Okay, we know Chucky haunted the dreams of many a child by virtue of the fact that dolls are scary and talking dolls are even scarier. But which movie actually raises the most goosebumps? The first film is much more interested in suspense and scares than the second, at which point Chucky was already becoming a movie star in his own right. Like Freddy before him, the more popular Chucky became, the less intimidating he turned out to be. The original Child's Play is a genuinely well-constructed thriller with director Tom Holland expertly staging several moments of horror, like when Chucky first truly comes to life or the voodoo death of John. Even the ending, which gets increasingly far-fetched, is still aimed at freaking out the audience. Meanwhile, the sequel is a little more concerned with kills and chuckles, leaving the chills behind in favor for the bigger, the better mentality. There's no getting around the fact that the first film is just plain scarier. Verdict? Child's Play. Both Child's Play movies prove one thing at the end: Chucky really is fucking hard to kill. So much so that the dude dies nearly 1,000 deaths at the end of both films. The first film goes for a small-scale showdown, pitting a truly pissed-off Chucky against Andy, Karen, and Mike. And Mike's unwitting partner, who briefly sees up close just what all the fuss is about. Chucky's resilience is on full display here, not letting a little incineration or getting his arm and head blown off from stopping him. It all goes a tad over the top, what with Chucky's arm somehow navigating its way through the apartment's ventilation system in order to choke someone. But overall, it's a tense and serious finale that satisfyingly ends with Chucky a crispy shell of his former self.
Wanna play?
The sequel opts for a more grandiose climax, bringing us inside the good guy factory where all sorts of cartoonish action takes place. If Chucky was resilient in the original, he's nearly goddamn impossible to kill now, although it's not for lack of trying. Chucky goes through a hell of a lot here, from ripping off his own arm and inserting a blade into the stump, to having his legs torn off and being melted in scalding hot molten plastic. All that before the final indignity of having an air hose shoved in his mouth, resulting in a painful head explosion. It's all very comical, but there's no denying it's certainly entertaining to watch this movie try to top itself several times over the course of about 5 minutes. When weighed against each other, both of these films' finales proved to be enjoyably wild and unpredictable. Verdict? Draw. So, at the end of the day, which is the better movie? One thing is for sure, both films have their own unique personalities. The original is a gritty, grounded thriller, grounded save for the killer doll shenanigans, of course. It's sometimes closer to a detective drama than to a full-on horror movie relying on suspense and mystery to drive the story forward. It's only until Chucky really comes alive halfway through that it veers into legit terror territory. The second film departs from the dark atmospherics of the first one in favor of a brighter, hyper-stylized look, with cinematographer Steven Zapsky lending the film a slightly surrealistic aesthetic. It's not as effectively creepy as the first one, but what it lacks in scares, it sometimes makes up for in eye-popping effects, vivid kills, a wicked sense of humor, and perhaps most importantly, the gift of Chucky as leading man, paving the way for a couple of decades of the pint-sized smart aleck essentially being the main character in the series. But for all its naughty fun, the sequel can't quite top the original. The OG Child's Play is a classic not just thanks to Chucky, but because it's a legitimately well-made horror film with strong performances, film noir vibes, and an iconic villain at his nastiest. As might often be the case, we simply can't vote against the original. And the winner here is Child's Play. The sequel put up a good fight, but there's still no topping the one that started it all. This is just our opinion though, so weigh in with your takes in the comments section below. It's scary movie season! Well, for some diehard fans, that's every season. But one thing that horror film buffs and the casual movie-going crowd can agree on is that The Shining is arguably the best horror movie of all time. We've seen it so many times, it's basically a comfort movie at this point, based on the novel by prolific author Stephen King and adapted by the legendary Stanley Kubrick. The film stars the incredible Jack Nicholson delivering some of the most disturbing and intense acting ever put to celluloid. What more can we say about The Shining that hasn't already been said? Fast forward nearly 40 years later to 2019, Dr. Sleep hit theaters but underperformed at the box office. The long-awaited sequel to The Shining, based on the 2013 novel of the same name, stars Obi-Wan Kenobi himself, Ewan McGregor, playing adult Danny Torrance. The follow-up focuses on Danny dealing with the aftermath of the first movie's events while protecting teenage girl Abra, who possesses the power to shine from the evil monsters of the True Knot led by Rose the Hat. In this modern age of legacy sequels, Dr. Sleep fared very well critically and currently has a fresh rating over on those tomatoes that are rotten. But which of these Stephen King adaptations shines the brightest? That's right, grab your axe and pour yourself a glass of red rum, because it's time to shine.
Face off!
Disclaimer. No actual science was used to determine the outcome of Face Off. Your results may vary. Please do not consume Face Off if you are allergic to conjecture, opinion, or general nonsense.
Round 1. Unsettling setting.
Throughout the history of horror, the most important element outside of the antagonist is its setting. Whether it's the Bates Motel or Camp Crystal Lake, it's all about location, location, location. So which of these supernatural settings draws first blood? The Shining is remembered heavily for its setting at the extremely isolated Overlook Hotel. Fun fact, the exterior of the hotel was shot at the Timberline Lodge at Mount Hood in Oregon. What more is there to say? Everything from that obscene carpet, the elevator unleashing a torrent of blood, room fucking 237, and the hedge maze. As Jack Nicholson descends into madness, we feel we're going insane right along with him. On the flip side, the majority of Dr. Sleep is set in New Hampshire, which is a far cry from the isolated Colorado Rockies. The story's setting is actually more sprawling as we bounce around parts of the country following Danny, Rose the Hat, and Abra. At least for the climax, we return to the Overlook Hotel, which is still standing here, unlike the source material since it burned down at the end of King's original novel for The Shining. That being said, this is an easy one. The Shining strikes first. Verdict? The Shining.
Just gonna bash your brains.
Play with us, Daddy.
Round 2. Scary story.
No one tells better terrifying tales than the horror king himself, Stephen King. As the story goes for The Shining, Jack Torrance is a writer with a bit of a drinking problem who accepts the opportunity to become the caretaker of the Overlook Hotel in the Rocky Mountains, a hotel that happens to be haunted as fuck. Jack brings his wife Wendy and his son Danny along for the ride as Jack himself slowly starts to go batshit crazy, all thanks to the sinister forces that occupy the place. Oh, and his son can shine Shine, which is a fancier term for psychic abilities. Kind of like Professor X, except way creepier. And the story for Dr. Sleep is criminally underrated. About 40 years later, after the events of The Shining, middle-aged Danny Torrance struggles with alcohol himself to suppress his shining ability. Like father, like son. After moving to New Hampshire and going through AA as a fresh start, Danny begins working at a hospice and uses his ability to help the patients cross over to the other side. Hence the nickname Dr. Sleep. Meanwhile, Dick Halloran appears to Danny and begs him to help the teenage Abra, who has the same ability to shine as well, as she's being hunted by Rose the Hat, who feeds on young children that shine. So what we have here is a classic horror story that stands the test of time, as well as a brilliant and underappreciated follow-up story that exceeds expectations. But to us, this is when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. So we're calling this round a draw. Verdict: draw.
Just gonna bash your brains.
Play with this, Daddy.
Round 3, dark direction.
This may be a lopsided round, but it most certainly has to be addressed. The Shining was directed by the legendary Stanley Kubrick, who also produced and co-wrote the film. And what has been said that hasn't been said already? The standouts, such as the use of the groundbreaking Steadicam, the iconic shots of pure terror, and the absolute top-notch performances from his entire cast. The last part is somewhat controversial since Kubrick pushed his cast extremely hard to get the best out of them, particularly Shelley Duvall, whose hair was falling out during production. However, it's interesting to note that Kubrick protected Danny Lloyd, who played little Danny Torrance, by having him believe they were shooting a drama, not a horror film. Director Mike Flanagan was given one of the most daunting tasks in horror movie history. How on earth do you fill in the shoes of the great Stanley Kubrick, direct a sequel to one of the greatest horror films of all time, and respect King's novel on top of all that? Given all that, Flanagan still managed to pull it off. He even recreated some iconic shots from The Shining in the climax of the film. And at the end of the day, even though King is not a fan of the film himself, Kubrick's direction is unmatched and completely owns this round. Verdict: The Shining.
Just gonna bash your brains.
Play with this, Daddy.
Round 4, menacing monsters.
Monsters, ghosts, supernatural forces, living nightmares. What makes this Shining duology stand out from every other horror flick and thriller are the monsters that wreak havoc on our protagonists. So let's compare these freaks to see who takes the cake this round. In The Shining, there are a bunch of haunted beings that lurk in the Overlook Hotel. We at our cores shaken by the freaky twins that Danny bumps into. I mean, Jesus Christ on ice skates, look at them! Pure nightmare fuel. And in some twisted way, we're kind of charmed by Lloyd the bartender because, come on, he's fucking awesome. Then there's the Dogman. What the hell is his deal? Your guess is as good as ours. And talk about going northbound to straight up disturbing shit when Jack meets the woman in room 237. Yikes. We totally feel Jack's reaction. Bottom line, these freaks haunted us for years and are still embedded in pop culture to this day. Although nowhere near as frightening as the monsters of the Overlook, the monsters of the True Knot are chillingly memorable and elevate Dr. Sleep into a wild good time. Led by Rose the Hat, portrayed by the beautiful Rebecca Ferguson, they are nearly immortal freaks who have been walking the earth for ages, hunting children who shine like vampires to blood. Some of the members include Crow Daddy, Rose's lover and right-hand man, Grandpa Jonas Flick, the oldest member of the group who's been alive since the Roman Empire, Barry, whose main ability is to locate the children who have the power to shine, and Snakebite Andy, who takes much pleasure in killing and mutilating men. Man, that's a pretty twisted and naughty crew. Look, we understand they're not as iconic as the monsters of the Overlook, but they certainly carry the movie. As we watch them fiendishly hunt, we root hard for Danny and Abra to take their asses out. This may be contentious, but we're chalking up this round as a draw. Verdict: draw.
Just gonna bash your brains.
Play with this, Daddy.
Round 5, creepy cast.
The Shining has a commanding lead in this face-off, but can Dr. Sleep's resiliency make this a closer match? Let's take a closer look at these all-star casts that make these movies goated material. Not many horror flicks have stacked casts, but The Shining totally does. Shelley Duvall really displays sheer terror as she fights for her life as Wendy Torrance. Fun fact, Stephen King originally wanted Jessica Lange for the role. Can you imagine getting chased by King Kong and by Jack Nicholson? Anyway, Danny Lloyd did wonders for the role of young Danny Torrance, and other standouts include Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran, and we are still pissed that he got the axe, literally. Joe Turkel as our favorite bartender Lloyd, all anchored by the performance of a lifetime by Jack fucking Nicholson, who delivers perhaps the single best performance in cinematic horror history. Another quick note here, Robert De Niro was considered for the part too. As much as we love De Niro, thank God for Nicholson, he's a revelation here. Dr. Sleep boasts a fantastic cast as well, with promising young actress Kylie Kieran as Abra Stone, with support from Carl Strucken, who you'll recognize from the 90s Addams Family movies, Robert Longstreet, the incredible Zahn McClarnon, Emily Allen Lind, and rounding out the True Knot group is Rebecca Ferguson. The talented Jacob Tremblay plays a minor role as Bradley Trevor, one of the poor victims of the True Knot. The entire cast is spearheaded by a magnificent Ewan McGregor playing the role of an older, traumatized Danny Torrance. Oh, and spoiler alert, we have to mention E.T.'s Henry Thomas taking on the role of Jack Torrance, who's now the bartender at the Overlook Hotel. Quite a sight to behold, really. But at the end of the day, both movies contain amazing actors that bring these characters and stories to life. But there's one difference maker here, and that is Jack Nicholson delivering a career-defining performance. And when Jack is at his fucking best, nothing and no one can touch him. So once again, winner of this round and overall face-off is The Shining. Shine on, motherfuckers!
Just gonna bash your brains.
Come play with us, Daddy.
Look, Dr. Sleep had quite the uphill battle with this one, but by no means do not dismiss this fantastic sequel. If you haven't seen this movie, stop what you're doing and go watch it right now. Both the theatrical cut and the director's cut are intriguing viewings. If you happen not to like it, you should give it another chance, because there's a lot to appreciate here, whether you're a fan of the original Kubrick film or King's source novel. The movie manages to respect both the original film and King's writing, but obviously Kubrick's The Shining is on a whole other level. The atmosphere is unforgettable, the haunting images stick with you, we root for these characters, and to this day, people are still dissecting and debating every single frame of this masterpiece. Documentaries on this film are being produced, and The Shining has shaped our pop culture, especially around Halloween. Shout out to The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror. Who knows, maybe with some time and some retrospection, Dr. Sleep might enjoy the longevity that The Shining does. But for now, let us know in the comments which of these two films shine brightest for you, The Shining or Dr. Sleep. And as always, thanks for watching.